सभी को नमस्कार। मुझे लगता है 5 से 10 मिनट और लगेगा और बाकी लोग भी ज्वाइन कर लेंगे। तब तक आज की जो स्पेशल लेक्चर दे रही है मैम वो भी ज्वाइन कर लेंगी। तो आप सभी इस फोरम पे अवेलेबल रहें और अगर अपना वीडियो ऑन कर लेंगे तो हम सबके लिए थोड़ा सा आसानी होता है एक दूसरे को जानना पहचानना। और वर्चुअल फोरम है, अगर वीडियो ऑन रहेगा तो थोड़ा लाइव लगता है। नमस्कार सर।
सर नमस्कार।
आज तो आप बिल्कुल बदले बदले से लग रहे हैं।
हाँ सर, थोड़ा चेंजेस किया है, बहुत
बहुत
बड़ी हो गई
चेंज
थी।
किया है। नहीं, बहुत अच्छा किया, बहुत अच्छा किया सर। हाँ सर, हम लोग का एक स्पेशल लेक्चर है।
सर
बहुत अच्छी स्कॉलर हम लोगों को कई दिनों से बात चल रही थी, तो मैम ने अपना टाइम दिया बहुत बिजी शेड्यूल से, तो हम लोग आज उनको सुनते हैं और देखते हैं कि क्या नया
बिल्कुल सर,
इनपुट मिल सकता है।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल वेलकम सर।
तो मुझे लगता है 5 से 10 मिनट और लगेगा
हाँ
मैक्सिमम।
कोई
तब
नहीं,
तक
कोई नहीं,
और
अभी
लोग
आ
भी
रहे हैं।
ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं।
हाँ
हाँ
आ रहे हैं बच्चे आ रहे हैं।
जी जी। हरी बाबू।
यस सर, गुड इवनिंग सर।
गुड इवनिंग, गुड इवनिंग। थैंक यू टू ज्वाइन। क्या चल रहा है आजकल? छुट्टियां हो गई या अभी सेशन चल रहा है?
सर हमको तो फिलहाल कोविड के सिम्टम्स थे तो हमारी
ओए,
छुट्टियां ही हैं एक तरह से। यस
क्या
सर।
बात। प्लीज भी
हाँ
टेक केयर है।
इसलिए
कहाँ, घर पे हो आइसोलेट या हॉस्टल में?
आइसोलेटेड है सर, घर पे ही है।
वेरी गुड, वेरी गुड। मैम भी ज्वाइन कर ली हैं, बस हम लोग शुरू करते हैं 5-2 मिनट में करते हैं।
ओके सर।
और हरी
Hi,
फिर फ्री
Manish.
होके बात करना। हाय मैम।
Hi, Manish. Hi. So good to see
नाइस
you
टू
again.
सी यू आल्सो। या हम
In
बहुत
the
दिन बाद
middle of
देख रहे
all
हैं लेकिन
this.
लग नहीं रहा है।
Well, नहीं लग बिल्कुल लग नहीं रहा है. And I was
थैंक यू।
just thinking that we missed type of day, and
या
I just plans of to meet you and going to Mumbai and buying Banarsi sarees
या
and of course the saddest part is that Assam passed away. That's so sad actually because you
वेरी
know
वेरी
after
वेरी सॉरी। ही वाज
very
रियली
sad.
वन ऑफ द ग्रेट टीचर।
Great. He was you know I met so many people through Typo Day and other conferences, but you know what takes one full year to organize. He was given only 2-3 months after the crash of Lebanon in December. Graciously he said, "Okay, I'll do it," and he would throughout the event he would only smile. He had nothing but a smile on his face. He looked after us every day for breakfast.
Yeah.
He would come pick us up and go. So, well, anyway, BH is going to happen next year or the year after that. So that we do.
दैट्स ग्रेट मैम, दैट्स
So,
ग्रेट। मैम अगर आपकी परमिशन हो तो हम लोग आज का सेशन शुरू करें। लैंग्वेज विल बी एज पर योर कन्वीनियंस, नो प्रॉब्लम फॉर हिंदी एंड इंग्लिश आल्सो।
okay, I'll do English.
या नो प्रॉब्लम दैट।
No
इज देयर एनी प्रेजेंटेशन और यू हैव ओनली टॉक?
I have a presentation.
इट मींस यू कैन शेयर इट। या नो प्रॉब्लम दैट।
I have slides. It's
That's
coming.
good. That's good. I just give you 5 minute, 2 minute introduction for the overall concept and prospects.
You send this.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome, Professor Ajanta Sen, ma'am. He's one of the leading scholar in India for the humanities and especially in the field of design also. Right now, this forum is created for one of the running project, Spark, from Ministry of Education. The title was that project is History of Social Design in India and USA with a special reference to infographics, advertising, human-centered design and marketing. And now today we are hosting the Professor Ajanta Sen, ma'am. He is a visiting research scientist, humanities and social science, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and visiting faculty, Industrial Design Center, Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai. एंड मैम आज हम लोगों के सामने इसी रिलेवेंस में जो ओवरऑल कंटेक्स्ट है सोशल डिजाइन के एस्पेक्ट्स पे अपने नजरिए को पेश करेंगे और द टॉपिक इज सोशल बाय डिजाइन एंड इमर्जिंग फ्रेमवर्क फॉर जेनेसिस कंस्ट्रक्ट्स एंड टाइप्स। मैम आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। मैं चाहूंगा कि अब फोरम आप अपने हिसाब से मैनेज करें और जब सेशन खत्म होने वाला होगा तब सभी के पास अच्छा समय रहेगा। आप अपने हिसाब से क्वेश्चन आंसर कीजिए, कोई टाइम लिमिट नहीं है।
Okay, great. Thank you, Manish. Thank you. So I'll start my session. So my video is going to be on, let's see. This is a separate thing for video, so it stays on.
Yes.
Just trying to adjust it a bit. So we can make the screen big, no? Manish, do you have my screen big on your?
Ma'am, yes. Your screen is full screen is showing. No problem.
Okay. Great. So I'm going to start. Sometimes when opportunities chase us, or we recognize a serendipitous moment, we are compelled to burst upon our existence. We are compelled to seize the opportunity of the moment, and not being able to exactly pinpoint that it's, even though we sense it, we are not able to name it. We sense it in our hearts, and then we christen it with a name and we dive into history to understand and unveil its past. This is what has happened to what we formally recognize today by the name of social design. To be euphoric of its recent discovery, as if it were a new entity to us, but deny our very existence. For as long as the human has existed, he or she has been social, and he or she has designed one's surroundings, at first simply to survive, and gradually to relish and to cherish. The term social design is technically quite new, and about a decade ago, there were it was at the initiative of those in the West, some from IDEO, some from D School, some from other universities, took it upon themselves to understand what social design is. And through this serendipity in the West's gradual need to shed some of its cherished individualistic tendencies in exchange for shared endeavors in social spaces got unveiled. So, in this new quest for wanting to explore the virtues of conviviality, which is actually this idea of being social, being together with others, uh, the West started shedding some of its, individualistic virtues of being iconoclastic, idiosyncratic, which means that you do things for its own sake. Idiosyncratic is one of a kind. Iconoclastic is you try to create, a kind of dramatic thing out of it with absolutely no heed whether it's percolating down to other people or not. So there is this whole iconism associated with individualistic space that has been part of the West, also because with the advent of the machine age, the space itself, the machine required individuals to sit separately uh, and attend to the machine. You could not actually work together anymore. And because of that, across 200 years, and for various other forces that were connected to the machine, the West started cherishing its individualistic space, and along with that, some of its family structures started getting extended system, family system came to naught, and uh, uh, it became the new normal in the West, something that even now, in spite of urbanization, India is not used to. So I make this distinction between the West and culturally mediated societies to say that my take on social design um, from trying to repose on social design a long evolutionary history, because if we did not do that, we would not do any justice to social design. And one also needs to understand that in a social space, the individual sublimates itself to the designs of a common community objective. And to what extent those who wish to do social design are prepared for that is also something that they need to understand, because good social design will happen like any other design from a mindset. It will not simply happen from textbooks or reading up things. It will happen when you absorb certain ideas deeply connected to how you do things in community space. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, as I welcome you to a session that is challengingly faceless because I cannot see my audience, and it is sadly marred by distance because under normal circumstances I would probably have been at BHU. I transport myself in my imagination to the sacred geography of Benares, the way the writer Diana Eck described the city, or to Varanasi, that Mark Tully, the journalist, characterized as being the unity of opposites, both beautifully describes the city. And I further imagine I've been transported to the great place of learning that is BHU, started by Malviya, and suddenly I have come face to face in my mind, in my mind's eye, with the audience, who I welcome again, and the organizers as well, especially Dr. Manish Arora, who I warmly thank for giving me this opportunity to visit Benares, even though we are all sitting in all our different locations. My quest today will be to first outline very briefly what social design is not, after which I will attempt to identify some of the driving forces behind the genesis or origins of social design. This forms a very important part of my submission, because you will see that from the different streams of impact that are brought in from different disciplines, we stand to understand how social design has actually drawn its inspiration for its origin from quite a set of eclectic sources, which also says that social design is actually a kind of creature, somewhat like the amoeba, that knows to absorb entities from the surroundings, which in some sense is a good thing for design. After I complete my submission on the genesis or origins of social design, I will pick on the singular construct of social capital, and my submission here will be to understand how social design does not come in a vacuum. Social design becomes a derivative of the social capital that we create in a system. And it is studying those social capital is where we find the test bed for design opportunities, which we then decide to pick or not pick. So if we pick up design opportunities from social capital, we get to convert our design abilities into social design. But if the system is not does not exhibit social capital, I'll have to submit that it's very poor test bed for doing social design, because once again I say social design does not exist in vacuum. Uh, After this, I will, and therefore I will tap into the construct of social capital to identify a few such design opportunities. I will outline about 10, 12 of them. with actual examples from the field, with live project examples. And I will end the session with asking the question, what is that singular construct that gives a culture like India and cultures like India, such as cultures from Africa, cultures from South America, cultures from Southeast Asia, cultures from East European countries, what is it, that singular factor that gives cultures like ours agency to build and create artifacts of social design, solutions of social design to enrich our environments. Uh, so, as I said, I will start with what is not social design. First of all, one needs to be clear about the catch all phrase social and its derivative word society. Let me make a very crucial difference here. Those who've studied cultural studies, sociology, would have read about this, but because these are words that are flown into design, and that overflow, in that overflow, we have not actually bothered to clarify what they actually mean. Oftentimes, society and culture are used interchangeably, and I feel it is important that I make the distinction. Society, like I say, is a community with an internal set of protocols to guide its existence and activities. And I say it's internal to society because society does not consult an outside entity to decide what its kinship, what its rituals, what its various value structures will be. Uh, we rarely get to actually see how a society functions because it's an internal affair, and therefore ethnographers, when they go into society to study, to understand, uh, they need to sublimate themselves so that those from the society are not able to identify this outsider and behave differently. Uh, Culture, on the other hand, is the external expression of these rules, knowing that society, and another important factor here, culture is the external expression of these rules. It expresses itself through various medias, but the expression happens for a reason. The expression happens knowing that society is a staging ground of felt needs and need gaps, and culture is actually the externalizing of the problems that we see in these need gaps and the problem solving that we adapt. So society is a staging ground for showing us the problems, uh, making us look at felt needs and need gaps, and culture is where we actually go ahead and attempt to solve. And that's why media plays such a big role in expressing the what culture attempts to do, because medias like art, uh, and so many others are actually they're not idle medias. They're constantly actually trying to communicate that if there is something wrong somewhere, that media is trying to bring it forth in a way that it feels like you have achieved equilibrium. And if you haven't achieved equilibrium, then it would mean that you're working under an ideology such as leftism, which does not believe in achieving equilibrium because it believes that the moment you achieve status quo, you are dead. You have become part of the elite. So, but in most other models of equilibrium, we aim to harmonize and we aim to settle down to problems that have got solved. So, this is the crucial distinction. Secondly, what is the definition of when design becomes social? Is it only when you do it for a community and hence only when the numbers are involved? Then I ask the next question. If that is so, following this, if you do it for the numbers, does it always become social? So, for example, are geo products that command such high numbers, or for that matter, Google or Facebook, are they all social design? Because they command huge numbers. Or is it social design only when the numbers generate social capital? And I will come to that after later on. Social capital basically represents the greatest long-lasting good of the greatest numbers. And social capital would be embodied or be represented through tools or expressions such as graffiti, such as murals, which are beautiful visual environments through which a society protests itself, uh, expresses what is wrong and what needs to be corrected. You can also have embodied products such as matka water vessels that are beautifully designed and kept in public space uh, for the tired traveler to drink. And someone out there in the community makes sure that the matka is always filled. So it may be a very modest example of social design. Nonetheless, it is very robust. Such a matka, double-walled matka, has provided you with cold water for centuries now. It's such a sturdy design. Or, for example, a recent invention called Mitti Cooler, which was built by I think someone from NIT as a frugal local refrigerator made of this double-walled say technology from earthenware, baked earthenware, and located in environments where there is no remote rural areas where there's no electricity. So these these create social capital, and social capital is created when you actually uh, solve problems not just for yourself and your community, but you actually go beyond that to solve it for some unknown entity that may get benefited. So, if society's mindset is that I will only do for myself, there will be no social capital. But if society says all that I have needs to be shared and needs to be shared with uncertain times and uncertain factors, then that willy nilly at some point in time will generate social capital. A great example of social capital currently is the fact that India has sent out vaccines even though we ourselves are in such large numbers, but India's social and cultural mindset says that the world is our home, right? Of course, we have to send vaccines to the less fortunate or to our neighbors because, for example, when we eat sweets, we always first distribute to neighbors before we eat sweets, right? So, why should the distribution of vaccine to other countries be an exception? Lastly, uh, I want to bring in this distinction that social design is not necessarily frugal design, although I gave you the example of the Mitti Cooler. Social designing, uh, uh, frugal designing is about designing from bootstrap resources, uh, and it becomes a mindset where you are constantly prudent and careful about using up resources because you don't want to waste resources, and you build a framework of frugal design because eventually you feel that given the carrying capacity of land and where you live, this is all that you can afford. But uh, frugal design also carries with it connotations of the economically disadvantaged, which is not necessarily true. It just could mean that you're careful about how you use your resources, but it also could mean that you are a landscape of very sparse resources. Social design is not necessarily frugal design because it basically needs to extend itself, include groups that are marginalized. So it could be groups such as LGBTQT, or what is that? Or LGBTQ, or it could be women, it could be children, um, and so on. So the idea of social design is to make itself accessible, to make its design inclusive, and to be able to empower a marginalized community. So these boundary conditions uh, it help us actually establish uh, the I'm just going to take a couple of minutes break. I think I've why do I have this? Okay, so these boundary conditions help us give ourselves a certain amount of restrain in terms of deciding what social design ought to be, and more importantly what social design isn't. And I'm always very wary about terminologies that suddenly prop up on the design landscape. Some years ago it was ethnography, and then there was storytelling, and now it is sustainability, and suddenly there is social design. And it's kind of ironical that all of these terminologies have were born in the West, and all of these terminologies have actually been with us for centuries and for millennia. And many of these terminologies born in the West have been with very well known universities in the West, which have actually nothing to do with design. So, design has this propensity to borrow terminologies, which is fine because design is an applied field. And design's core proposition has never been very theoretical. But once the term is brought in, there one needs to actually delve deeper and not misuse the term. And therefore my attempt today will be to try and cover as many angles as possible, so that you're completely covered with what are the different areas from where social design can actually derive its sustenance. So even before we identify the forces behind social design, we need to say upfront that social design is premised on the word social, which is actually a very important word. The word has become trivialized in many regards, but it's a really important word and was first introduced into academic structures and knowledge and learning structures by John Locke, a philosopher from the 17th century, who made this grand announcement based on his knowledge proposition that man is a social animal. And it actually sent the West into a tizzy, because up until then, the West had no idea that the origins of man was in the ape, because Darwin came in a century later to say that we've actually evolved from ape. So it was completely shocking for society to be told that man is a social animal. On deeper introspection, we now know that the very first recognition of our socialness happened 70,000 years ago, when the human stopped being an animal and created what we term as the cognitive revolution, and which gave the human the ability to use one's imagination in very flexible ways in order to create, which is the basic ground proposition for design. In other words, the to create would be the ability to envision. And the very first use of this ability, according to a very interesting writer, Yuval Noah Hariri, who's written this book called Sapiens. He's written a few other books, a historian. In Sapiens, he says that the idea of the idea of being flexible, the mentally flexible and agile, was to be able to form social groups that would increase their chances of survival. Which means that if you're rigid, you'll be stuck on certain people, and those certain people might actually not be good for your survival. They may be sick, or they may be disloyal to your group. But if you if you are if you have a strong imagination and you actually decide to exercise it, then your mind becomes very fragile, very agile, and very flexible. And through that, you're able to extend your imagination to build scenarios. So, uh, technically, this ability to extend yourself is called fiction. In everyday life, we equate fiction with lies, but in storytelling, in technical terms, fiction is the idea of being able to expand your your mental your mental ability to look beyond where you are. In other words, to be able to envision. So by being able to extend yourself, extend your mind, you they were able to build scenarios through which they with actually imaginary benchmarks of possibilities. And they would ask questions in terms of who should they band with, how many would be good for let's say a hunting expedition, who should they leave behind, so that if a tiger pounces on them, they're not left in the woods because of this one person, and so on. So this ability of fiction, and scholars of mythology also call it imagined reality. This ability for fiction gave designs its very first tool, which is called scenarios, and its utility to test if an idea will work as a solution. And today it is one of the strongest tools for design, especially in the domain of intangible design, such as interaction design, and so on. So to reiterate, this ability for fiction towards survival is what gave us our imperative to do things in groups rather than as individuals. And you can see how far back it goes for the human to actually have the idea of social in its DNA. The designers, actually, the designs that came out of this evolutionary leap were first the ability to do scenarios, create scenarios. Secondly, the ability to cut tools to fantastic precision, so that it designated the human as being a maker. The tool that established this for sure was an obsidian tool. Obsidian is a natural stone. Uh, this was found in East Africa, in the in the I forget the name, in East African Kenya, and Olduvai Gorge, by the Leak family, with three generations of anthropologists. This particular tool, which is a near perfect tool, sits in the British Museum today. Now, the third ability that the humans had post cognitive revolution was the discovery of fire, and it reinforced one of the key tools of designing today, which is storytelling abilities, because the fire allowed humans to band together as a as a social entity and sit around, feeling warm and protected, but also protected from animals, because animals would stay away from people sitting together with a fire on. So that, and finally, through all this ability to observe nature and build further tools, and Alan Fletcher, this fantastic designer, who wrote a book called The Art of Seeing Sideways, writes in the book that humans learn to build tools by observing how animals do it. And recent research in the labs has proven that humans learn to do it by watching birds build tools. So you couldn't do it without actually observing, and it would not do for an individual to observe and record. It would require a whole village to observe year after year, to finally be able to come up with something that would actually work as design. And lastly, with this ability to envision, humans were able to carve on rocks images through which they tried to tell different things. So basically, a very strong media for messaging. So I've spoken about, as far back as we can possibly go in evolutionary terms, which is 70,000 years ago, the watershed of cognitive revolution, where the idea of social became gathered agency and continued across these 70,000 years. So, and through those post-cognitive revolution, through the 70,000 years, through the ability to social, we have designed innumerable number of things, which if you were designing in a social environment, you would obviously call it social design, but we never called it anything. And there's a reason also for not calling it. I will come to that later. It's a good thing we are calling it social design today. And the reason why we never named it is because social design actually works in a tacit environment. The knowledge with which we work in the social design domain is tacit, is invisible, and it's very difficult to actually technically put any terms to it, but nomenclatures to it. But because the West is very good at working with explicit structures, it uses that ability to actually look at structures and give them names, which is also a good thing. So now let's fast forward to another watershed, which was the birth of formal design in Bauhaus in 1919. 2 years ago, when we had typography at IDC, it was also the 100th year of Bauhaus and 50 years of IDC, proud to say. So, what happened? The birth of Bauhaus did not happen without another watershed moment 50 years before that, 70 years before that, around mid 1850s, when William Morris made social design his charter of fame through his arts and craft movement in the 1850s. This was because he was fired by the appalling social circumstances that was bred out of the the collaterals of industrial revolution, and along with his cohorts such as painter J.W. Turner and philosopher Ruskin Bond, and there were others. Um, Boris agonized over the state of affairs that the material environment had been reduced to on account of the machine. So the basically the landscape was ugly looking with suboptimally function cheap products churned out by the machine, and of course the machine never consulted man, so it was never human centric. Morris's anguish over all this very, very pervading ugliness in the prevailing culture of products was actually a concern for the fact that it was actually a concern for the social system. His concern came from the fact that society had turned into dross and was reduced to a proletariat state on one hand, the larger part of society with a few elite uh, people enjoying expensive handcrafted products. And this, of course, was not acceptable. Although Morris came from a very wealthy family, uh, somewhere it affected him deeply, and he used his own money to set up a workshop where he demonstrated that you could actually build good design quite inexpensively, design that would function well, that would have great form in order to create elegance, and in the order of affairs, the form would follow function and not the other way around. And we know all this to be part of evolution of design. And of course, there would be underlying process that would ensure that the productionizing of product was attached good material research and proper ergonomics, although the word ergonomics was not in use at that time. It came in much later. Contemporary to Bauhaus. So now I have illuminated two sets of impact in terms of uh, throwing some light on social design. The first being the watershed moment of a cognitive revolution that helped us build and strengthen social groups. The second was when Morris recognized that the stratification of English society uh, was so inimical to human existence that something had to be done. And singularly with the arts and craft movement, all of those who engaged with the arts and craft movement were able to actually reverse this very harmful paradigm to one that created products using the machine, but also using hand in a good balance that gave it form, that gave it function, and that gave it good material. And it took about 50 to 70 years for this whole form function to get formalized as uh, as of modern design in the school that we call Bauhaus. Now let's come to the third impact on social design. Let's take a different stream. Contemporary to Bauhaus, absolutely contemporary to Bauhaus, including its Russia-born, Russia-immigrated faculty uh, called Vasily Kandinsky, was the very powerful idea of historical materialism that is a Marxist idea that strives to understand the ground realities of resources availability and modes of production to be utilized strictly for the greatest good of the greatest number. So while Morris said design for all, uh, likewise, similarly, although with different ideological slant, the Marxists said resources to be used for the greatest good of the greatest numbers. And I think it's very regretful that when we are in school or when we get into college, we are never actually given uh, a lucid understanding of what Marxism. So either you become a Marxist and you're called pejoratively, you're leftist, you're this and that, or nothing. But that's not the case. Marxism had a very, very important contribution to make to design. It said that it is actually people's relationship with resources that determine what technology that people would need and what material they would use, because it would depend on what material was available. And it was through that toil and struggle that products and different kinds of environments, such as built environment, visual environment, etc., would get built. It would be a collective effort of people. It would not be the individualized effort of kings or queens, of presidents. Although when we read history, we history starts with who ruled from which year to which year. Do you get to hear what the people did? No, we don't get to hear. Likewise, today, when you read about history of design, you have all these icons appearing. But do you get to understand who they collaborated with? Okay, what were their background, inspirations? For example, Eames, Charles Eames spent, because he was not able to get a job after he graduated, he pushed off to Mexico. And over there, he was deeply impressed by the way people use material. And soon after that, he was invited to India by Nehru, where he was his idea of how cultures such as ours know how to use material changed his values. It became life changing for him. But nobody talks about that. You just talk about Eames and the few products that he had created, and you put him up, perch him up on an iconic status. It's a proposition that's completely rejected by historical materialism, and I think it's a good thing, because uh, 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 kings and queens, and by derivation and by extension, iconic designers don't really go to make design. Design is made with full understanding of need gaps, anticipated technologies. If they don't match with the product, those technologies will die. Those that match with products that are made in a robust fashion will live, and will live for hundreds of years, like the telephone. So this whole idea of the collective over the individual was, of course, a term socialistic, and social design is essentially socialistic. Social design is essentially guided by the idea of humans, uh, relationship with the resources in his environment, and the kind of modes of production that he employs to leverage the resources to make them into products. The image I show here is of Dr. Vandana Shiva, who's done fantastic work in trying to understand the singular proposition of food security. It has been her proposition, her preoccupation in the last about 10, 15 years. Before that, she spent a lot of time trying to fight multinational corporations from America from taking away our homegrown traditional knowledge systems such as haldi, basmati rice, and attempt to IPR and copyright them in patent them in their own country in the USA. And she fought tooth and nail and made sure that that doesn't happen. That traditional knowledge systems remain in public domain, and of course it assumed the name of Creative Commons thanks to the works of those like Vandana Shiva. Here she is sitting in her seed library, uh, and seed library is a very important. It's not just a physical thing anymore, it's a construct because of the onslaught of GM crops which are seedless. And the seedless for a reason. The seedless because you will, as a farmer, I will, when I buy GM crops, I have seeds. And then when my crops grow, they're seedless. So then I have to go and buy. And the externalities, the cost of that is so high that farmers after farmers have got ruined because they never factored into the idea that they would actually have to buy seeds where conventional crops always had seeds. So seed is a very powerful idea to say that you must not fall for so-called new technologies and inventions without actually questioning what they're going to give you. Now, since I've talked about people's struggles on the ground and their felt needs and the subliminal cues that they embed into society, this actually helps uh, society, that is, these groups of people, these communities, anticipate technology. And it is because the ground becomes prepared that those like Henry Dreyfus was able to build his telephony. The Lumiere brothers were able to build the moving image, which came to be known as cinema. Or much later in recent times, Tim Berners-Lee, the scientist from CERN, and later on at MIT, was able to build on the fruits and toils of Vannevar Bush and others from way back in the mid 40s to eventually build his WWO, which is the people's domain of the internet. So all of these technologies have actually had social components without which the technologies would not have been ready for use. And social design needs to understand if it is actually working with those kind of technologies, or is it just using technology because it loves to tinker around, because that would not work for social design, because social design requires very robust, uh, used, tested technologies. Now let me go to my impact number 4. I mentioned Kandinsky. I mentioned two groups of people, the futurists and the cubists. The futurists, of which Kandinsky was a part, the movement that was established in 1922 with the Big Bang, actually rejected the established protocols of society, where once again they were fighting elitism, and they felt that art needed to reach people. Art needed to be part of people's domain. And Kandinsky, who had by that time joined the Bauhaus in 1923, and he was part of the Bolshevik Revolution just a few years before that in 1917, created his work, his graphic design using diagonal lines, sharp diagonal lines to show dynamism, because according to futurists, according to Marxists, and futurists are actually an offshoot of Marxists, according to them, your struggle, you are alive as long as you're struggling, and struggle is about being dynamic. The moment you sit and you do nothing, you sit and you become lazy, you're usurping other people's resources, you've become part of the bourgeoisie, and you've attained status quo, which is a very harmful thing for society. So Kandinsky's use of his dynamic proposition, rejecting the static, and the use of sharp diagonal lines as a design element was a big leap of understanding of design and contribution to design, and it continues till date. Manish would know, he teaches his students design, and he knows that the difference is in the way that you interpose the line on a canvas, and the thickness, and various other measures that will actually communicate whether you are being dynamic or whether you're being static. And of course, Kandinsky did this in the context of groups of people trying to achieve something. So the social component to Kandinsky's work or other futurist work was a very important thing. They were all actually grounded, art movements that fought for people. The other, the parallel group that came 3, 4 years, 4, 5 years later was the Cubists, led, of course, by Picasso, Spanish-born Picasso, at that time settled in Paris, who built the Guernica, this famous mural, life-size mural. I've seen this at the Smithsonian. It was built. He did Guernica, although Picasso's paintings are full of colors, but you'll notice that Guernica is black and white. And Guernica is full of distorted animals and distorted shapes and faces and representing anguish, because Guernica was a little village in Basque countryside in Spain, northwest Spain, northeast Spain, which always had this tendency to rebel. And General Franco, at the behest of, with a nudge from Hitler, because Franco and Hitler were of the same disposition, one morning bombed the village and killed almost everybody. It was not known to the outside world. When they came to know, those like Picasso withdrew in great anguish, and he drew this as a expression of what should never happen. And he did it as a large size mural to be kept in public domain, to be seen not as a framed little painting in the comfort of the drawing room, but as a large mural withstanding the elements of nature out there in public domain for anybody interested in understanding what exploitation is, to be able to come and see and gather some force out of it, go back and galvanize your own line of protest. Likewise, we have Diego Rivera from Mexico, a friend of a cohort of Picasso, and Diego Rivera's renowned equally for his partner Frida Kahlo, both of whom were prolific painters. And Rivera chose to, like Picasso, to draw on a full screen. They were all Marxists. In fact, Picasso became so disgusted with the capitalistic bourgeois system that he actually went across to Moscow, and he became a card-holding Marxist, which a lot of people probably don't know. But here is Diego Rivera, who was invited by Rockefeller to paint in this huge atrium in the Rockefeller Center. If you've been there in New York, you'll see it's a huge atrium. And he was commissioned to do that. And while he was painting, it set up ladders, everything. Halfway, almost 3/4 way into the painting, he was stopped because there were journalists who discovered that there was Lenin peeping out of the background. And he was basically painting people's struggles. So under the pressure that it created, he was asked to leave. It took away many years of livelihood because he was banking on this. He went back to Mexico, not a broken man, because he was very rebellious. He went back and he drew the same mural, put it outdoors, and let people know that art will not be subdued by a few capitalists. And art in the outdoors, in the form of mural, will always win because it has people's blessings and participation. A few years later, while all this was happening in the 40s, in the 30s, in the 40s, 20 years later, we had the students, parallel student revolts in the month of May in 1968. It happened in Mexico, it happened in Paris, and it happened in Calcutta. And students did the same kind of rejecting of the system. They rose as a group and they said that we want the system to be uprooted inside out, so that we are no longer oppressed with all of these age-old, traditional, corrupt structures. We are prepared to give up comfortable lifestyles, but the system needs to be changed. And graffiti was employed as a graphical tool of protest. The graffiti on the right is One, it's a little bit like David Hockney coming and painting, at night, and who's this painter in England? Not Hockney. He comes at night and he paints on a huge wall and he disappears after that. These
Banksy.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Banksy. So this is like Banksy, where this character called Subodh. Here it says Shubodh tui palija, like flee Shubodh flee, run Shubodh run. He carries a little sun in his bag and in his basket, and he's this anguished character who appears, unknown to people on different walls, and this is about Subodh being tortured because of inimical social conditions, and somewhere it crossed the border, went into Calcutta, and no one really knew who was doing all this, and the theme was Hobeki, will it happen? So, and then on the left you find graffiti also in Calcutta. If you've ever gone to Calcutta by train, even now you will find life-sized type, beautifully, painted on the wall, talking about different things. They're always about protest, and always about the common man. So I come to my impact or inspiration number 5, which is a very interesting intervention. So a natural question from the audience at this point could be the technology divide that assails society with the common man, and with the common man having little understanding of technology. And I would say that the person who stepped in was a Hungarian sociologist called Karl Mannheim, who had the temerity and the guts to say that knowledge, scientific knowledge, unless scientific knowledge assumes the role of being social, it is of no good, because unless you've made scientific knowledge and given it a social reality and a social component and reached it to the common man, only then science takes on some meaning. And Karl Mannheim's idea of converting scientific knowledge, which goes by the name of it is called this what is it called that knowledge that needs to be turned into social reality, uh, uh, is a framework that was adopted years later. It impacted a lot of people actually, but years later it was adopted, for instance, by the Kerala Sahitya Sabha Parishad, driven by this powerful theatre person called Panikar, who used theatre and local, idioms and their classical dance forms and folk and rural dance forms to communicate science to the common man. And it became a very successful model, and it was emulated by many others subsequently. And it's really, we should really be very proud that India is often called the NGO of the world, the world capital of NGOs, because people on their own accord, some of them wealthy, some of them not, who've left their comfortable lifestyles, come out and devoted their life to uplifting the social through various interventions. In this case, the interventions were mostly theatre and the popularization of science. I will show you ground examples of social design intervention in this area in my after this. So the so now what I would like to come to is yes. Yes. So the next impact that I'm going to talk about, which is impact number 6, comes straight from the design world. It was Manisha said it's okay. The So once again we go back to the drawers created by Industrial Revolution, which was contained because of those like William Morris, the birth of Bauhaus, and the birth of modern design, and all the form and function principles that it adopted, and brought back some kind of decency in the common man's domain by building good products. But modernism actually became quite arrogant starting from after the crash of the 29 Great Depression and the stock market crash onwards, when things turned a little socialistic. It was called New Deal under Roosevelt in USA. And soon after was the Second World War. And they always say that whenever there is a war, America steps in, America actually profits and becomes prosperous. So the Second World War actually made America prosperous. It lifted itself out of the depression, and it started spending a lot of money. And a lot of that money got spent on products that were pretty useless, products that were decided by large corporations sitting in their boardrooms using fancy technologies that most of the time didn't work, products that were not priced properly, and products that had very little connect to man's real needs. And the person who protested vehemently through his iconic book, the design of everyday life, Victor Papanek, who was actually who had studied in so many different places, including MIT, a person with great eclectic understanding of the world, and who had also spent many years amongst he walked the talk by spending a lot of years amongst Eskimos, amongst Hopi Indians. This is the native Indians in Arizona, those dry places, and Eskimos are in Iceland and Greenland. Spent a lot of time with them, and he was able to actually, in his protest about the disconnect between people and products, and that disconnect between people and products is actually the opposite of historical materialism. So Papanek, recognizes this, and he writes this book called Design for the Real World, venting out all his angst about this kind of disconnect. And he comes up with this idea of human ecology and social change, which was very rare because the West did not believe in did not believe in ecology, because you see, after the Industrial Revolution, it was the intention of those societies that were blessed by Industrial Revolution to use technology to subdue nature, because nature was an unnecessary thing. You needed to use technology, subdue nature, use its resources, and become what Vandana Shiva, for example, calls it, an extractive economy, where you must mercilessly extract from nature, not realizing that it is actually finite. So inside that, when someone like Papanek, sitting in New York, sitting in California, is able to introduce the idea of human ecology, which actually is respect for nature, and uses human ecology as a medium for social change, then you have to understand that it's this huge leap towards uh, collective, towards the collective, but also a collective that works in tandem with nature, which was completely inimical to the idea of product design or anything in the USA. And he also used this word called phylogenocide, going by what is called phylogenetic history, which is actually the history of living beings, starting from non-humans to humans, and all the biological species that have come that started 6 million years ago. So that time frame is called phylogenetic, and he calls it phylogenocide, which means it is the genocide, systematic eradication of species by man. So Papanek was a fantastic person who also worked with handicapped. He worked with all these distant tribes. He also traveled avidly through to culturally, mediated countries. About 7 countries, lived there, worked with them, and that is how he was able to propose this idea of human ecology. So Now, because I talk about human ecology, I have necessarily to come to the literally the birthplace of the idea of human ecology, which is India. And the world looks up to India because we have always talked about uh, our lifestyles vis-a-vis nature as being predominant and man sublimated to nature. You have Buddha's doctrines about nature, you have Mahavir's doctrines about nature, you have the largest number of vegetarian eating population of the world in India till date, and you have fasting, you have occasions when you offer prayers to different elements of nature, and so on. We continue, even though we live in cities, we continue with it, and the world uh, uh, actually bows its head down to the idea that we were able to come up with something called social ecology. Now, what is social ecology? Social ecology is, and I will again, once again, use the idea of opposition to explain to you what social ecology is. Social ecology is the opposite of deep ecology. Deep ecology is an environmental movement in the USA, which was initiated by the what is called the Arcadian and Wilderness movement, where their idea of protecting nature was to sequester nature, make them into national parks, and the only way the human or anybody else could enter those parks would be to watch and observe nature. And you won't believe in parks such as in Yosemite and Bryce, etc. They have signboards put up that you are not allowed to pick up even a single leaf or a stone because there are cameras there. So the idea of protecting nature by sequestering nature away from man was the opposite of what social ecology was. Social ecology that has evolved in India over the last 30,000, 20,000 years, or maybe more, says that humans will interact with nature uh, for livelihood reasons, but in a way where humans will not harm nature. And to do that, humans sit on this tripartite principle of social ecology, which is diversity, respecting the idea of diversity, respecting the idea of sustainability, respecting the idea of equity. Diversity, of course, is diversity of species, protecting the species and maintaining diversity. Sustainability means that you grow only as much as the land carrying capacity will allow you. And equity means those who are growing are given fair share of their toil that they have invested into that land. In this tripartite arrangement of social ecology, we was born a system of social that worked very well across centuries, and the collective sustainable behavior that went into our DNA and that got converted into constructs such as sacred forests. And the notion of the sacred simply said that these are places that are off limits certain times of the year, because that is when diversity needs to be given a chance to flourish, for example, during monsoon, etc. There are strict rules guiding when you can ingress the forest, exit the forest, what you can pluck, when you can pluck, and the group of humans that have formed these rules guard the forest like it is their own children. So it is also known that during the tsunami, the parts of eastern and western India that did not get destroyed by tsunami were the ones which had sacred forests and these mangroves. So there's a reason, there is a very logical reason to actually have these mangroves. And in order to protect them across the millennia, we we invest them with this idea of it being sacred, so that we are careful about what we do with those areas. Now, very interestingly, of course, we know that these are called tapovan. And in Africa, this idea of the sacred is called Ubuntu, which takes on the metaphor of the pond where animals of different kinds come to drink water with none harming the other. And that becomes a metaphor for all kinds of humans coming for all kinds of reasons and using only what you need to use, and do it in a way that is synergized, where interests are synergized with one another and doesn't harm nature. Now, it's very interesting that this is the idea of commons, right? Common natural property and common natural resources that we guard with our life. This idea of commons that we take for granted in cultures like India is uh, is not known in the West, because over there nature is subdued and nature is controlled and owned by humans. So the person who actually tried to understand, um, an economist called Eleanor Ostrom, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for her work on commons in 2009. I think she died recently. Is where she tried to understand what actually keeps these sacred forests and other sacred areas intact, and what has kept them intact across the centuries, whereas within matters of decade, such such resources have got completely plundered and spoiled in many parts of the world. And she realized that these commons should never be owned by institutions or companies, etc. They should, the only way that they will remain intact is if they were owned by self-governing groups, social groups that set the rules of the terms of reference, and the rules that they set, they are supposed to follow. And this was a revelation actually. So people, she observed that people are respectful of laws that they themselves have taken part in creating, in monitoring, and in enforcing. And this has come as a shock and revelation to economists in the West, that Ostrom was trying to say that you cannot own something. You have to let people hold it in trust, and in faith. So the idea of trust comes from there actually. You hold something in trust until your child turns 18, or you hold something in trust because you need to protect it. So flows on wheels to so this particular impact on social, the idea of social is actually quite profound, especially coming from the West, because it actually reinforces and it completely ratifies what we have known for millennia, and we have believed, and it is deep in our DNA, because we say, if the tap in the house, even if it's slightly dripping, your mother or grandmother will come and say, why don't you shut the tap properly, because it is Alakshmi. And this Devdutt Patnaik talks about this opposition of Alakshmi and Lakshmi, where he says you need Alakshmi is something that you don't allow entry into the house. Alakshmi stays till the doorstep. You hang michi and lemon, and Alakshmi likes michi and lemon, and once it gets at the doorstep, it goes away. Lakshmi is who you allow entry into the house. Lakshmi is the force that actually creates prosperity for you. So these kind of constructs that we use to protect our environment took on the form of storytelling, myths, magic, mythology. It's a model that I'll show you later. But as a quick observation, I would like to add here, as a cohort to social ecology, was another big surprise that came from hardcore science and engineering, from a newly developed area called cybernetics, developed by someone called Norbert Wiener at MIT. And Norbert Wiener used the idea of cybernetics was actually used by the Club of Rome, which was a grouping of concerned individuals about the state of affairs of our nature and the destiny of man and the predicament of the earth itself. And the Club of Rome was actually chaired by the owner of Fiat, a very wealthy person called Aurelio Pecci, who gave a lot of time to form these groups and said that what can we do to save the earth, and first make people understand that you're actually situated in social domains. You're not individuals free to do what you want to. You're interconnected, and you're interconnected in the way cybernetics sees its systems being interconnected. So so the books that came out, the iconic books that came out of the Club of Rome deliberations was one of them called Limits to Growth, written by MIT professors Medrose and Medrose, and there were a few others, but the present and the future predicament of man being examined through the filter of cybernetics as a system that shows interdependency in the social domain was a great contribution to the area of social and for social design, especially because it gives you an inkling of process, which many other inspirations here will not have allowed you to see how underlying process works. Lastly, I will cite a couple of examples from the world of technology, computational technology. The first one comes from Bill Buxton, this fantastic scientist who was a very young scientist at Xerox PARC in Palo Alto, and then he moved on to, he's a Canadian actually, and he moved on to the company that makes Maya software, Alias Wavefront. I had an opportunity to meet him in '97 when he was with Alias Wavefront, and this was at ICSID that was held in Toronto. So obviously he was a keynote. And then some years later, he had come to India with the Maya group to present, the films like Dinosaur and Perfect Storm. And the main makers of those films had come, and Buxton was actually guiding them. And I had a word with him, and a few years, 2, 3, 4 years later, when we were working with Microsoft through Design Expo, he was one of the jury, and by that time he had joined Microsoft Research as principal scientist. And there's a story behind it. Sometime I'll tell you. But he came up with this thing called three mirrors of interactions, where he was able to actually recognize human interactions, not only in the being a technologist, you would only envisage the domain of the cognitive, which is where you actually think, learn, and solve. But he was able to envisage the domain of the sensory, which is so far away, so far removed from a computational, domain. The sensory being where we sense and we control, and social, which is in between sensory and part cognitive part. Sensory requires social skills, which probably guided by tacit knowledge, and it is about how we relate to others. That whole uncertain factors of how we relate to others. So in this, Buxton advocates that the social domain is where the most amount of collective action is expected. Hence, technologies need to be located here, have to be friendly, have to be soft, have to be yielding, have to be organic. So that means the nature of the technology will have to follow the domain of interaction rather than the other way around. And it was quite path-breaking. Very quickly, I would come to something connected to what Buxton proposed, which was by a very, very nice psychologist, not one of the scary psychologists, a very nice psychologist called Edward T. Hall. His books are iconic, The Hidden Dimension being one of them. Please read them. They're fantastic. They're very nice, very easy to read. And he came up with what we call an anthropology of space, where he was able to understand that humans occupy different kinds of spaces depending on the particular context in which they are, but also as societies, some societies occupy more of their time in personal space, whereas some societies occupy more of the time in social space. And a good example of this would be, for example, when cricket is on, and you have a television set at home, but do you really sit at home and watch? You go to the neighbor's place, and the whole building will assemble in one neighbor's house. They'll all sit right from the television right into, spreading into the balcony and into the staircase, and then the lady of the house will make chai for everybody. And this whole community viewing is a kind of social space where Indians and cultures like ours like to reside in for most part of the time. We feel stifled in personal space, and that's why it's been a challenge during COVID times to keep people indoors. And if designers were to look at COVID as a set of design opportunities, then they will step in to try to understand how can you annotate the personal private space where we are now required to reside on account of COVID. How can you annotate to make it augmentative and feel like social? If you could come up with solutions that made the private space feel like social, Indians would not leave home. They would stay at home, enjoying that kind of design. So these are the kind of design opportunities that come out of, recognizing social capital. So, and it was the final example in terms of impact on social design, and how social design came to, create its legacy. All the different streams that contributed for it to help build its legacy and its genesis. The last example would be where social computing, which is the domain where computing proxies itself with social behavior. And we have now, over the last 20 years, been able to come up with technologies that proxy gesture, speech, through speech recognition, fantastic ways of being able to view things also through VR, through vision technology, touch technology, etc. So Manish, now I'm going to very quickly cover some ground applications of what I've spoken. Is that okay? Yes? Okay. So now it's not going to take so long, because what I've now put together as genesis of social design, I feel are streams that have drawn, where social design has actually drawn from contributions, variegated contributions. And if you go to look at it, then the contributions have come from design, from art, from anthropology, from paleoanthropology, from economics, from sociology, from technologists, from environmentalists, from technologies like cybernetics, etc. So it is a very vast field of influences that I've talked about, and I hope I've been able to communicate and articulate it for you well. You can sit on it, you can think about it, and each of these fields will offer you the possibility to design in different ways, to go into social domain and design in different ways. So if you take historical materialism, then you will actually begin to look at resources and start designing by understanding the equation between humans and resources. Whereas if you were to take Buxton's three mirrors, then you would go into domains of interaction and try to understand what technology suits which domain better. So there is a whole lot of thought process that you can also, add to this and try to understand what works, well for you. So one of the couple of things that a couple of names that I would like you to that I have with me in my notes that I forgot to mention. One of them is where in historical materialism we've had very powerful voices, very distinguished, eminent academics and practitioners like Romila Thapar and Damodar Koshambi. If you read, Romila Thapar is very nice to read in the way she actually expounds the idea of time in terms of Yuga, Kal, and all that, which is completely, impossible for non-culturally mediated societies to understand, because the Gregorian calendar is this 1 year, and then the 1 year will become, 10 years will become a decade and century, and that's a lot of time for them. Whereas our thing goes into phylogenetic time, and Romila Thapar actually defines that clock beautifully. So, and Damodar Koshambi, he talks about how tribals, etc., have influenced the way we actually build our products. So now let me go into the examples that I have lined up for you. This part is actually a more practical, grounded part, where I give a very brief description of what social capital is. And social capital is actually an invisible stock or capital that is created when its given community pursues goals not only for itself, but goals that transcend the specific benefits accruing to the particular community to benefit others far beyond the scope of that community. So, like I gave the example of vaccines, and I would also like to give the example of how Air India, which flies on taxpayers' money, made innumerable trips to rescue students from Wuhan, students from other parts of the world. And every time a flight went to Wuhan or elsewhere, it would be loaded with medicines and other, emergency supplies. And then it would come back with students. One time I remember there was this pilot flying to Germany, carrying stranded overseas passengers here. And apparently, every air control operator, starting from Pakistan all the way to Germany, opened up the air and saluted the pilot for going inside time, such hazardous time, carrying all of those. So this is the way social capital is created. And I will try to now understand how social capital is actually the breeding ground for design opportunities. So social design is actually a derivative of where social capital is created. I want to say that, I want to give the example of, for example, the Jaipur Fort. The Jaipur Fort sometimes feels like, they'll say the design of the Jaipur Fort, but it has actually got nothing to do with designers. Jaipur Fort was created out of, created by someone else, and and yeah, I'll complete this. Uh, and it was much later that designers from MIT and IIT Bombay intervened to uh, see how the Jaipur fort could actually be made better. So there's a couple of examples here in the last part of the earlier section that I had noticed. So two examples of social computing here, both of which we had presented to as part of Design Expo, worked with Microsoft. One is Edward T. Hall's shared space in the personal space, but within the family. So it's a social space, but it is person to person shared space where, where usually the observation came from where you're talking on the phone and your other hand is actually sitting and doodling. So we decided that why don't we use the surface of the, why don't we use a surface where we can doodle, and a touch surface on which we can doodle, and that becomes like the equivalent of the phone and sends messages across remotely to your grandparents and others. And one of the scenarios said that this is a young girl who's come to study in US and feeling very homesick during Diwali, and then she draws all these things and sends to grandparents, and then they send their ashirwad by touching the surface, and that when she reads that, she realizes that her grandparents have given her ashirwad. Marbo is, on the other hand, a shared public space, a shared media space where children, they play with marbles and they exchange marbles, right? So we use that metaphor where each marble would actually be, it's like a pen drive. So you have stories, you create stories in your own marble, and then you go to play and then you exchange marbles with each other. Each of you have the equivalent of the CPU, and then when you go back home, you find new stories, and then you come back with more stories, and in the process, all of this gets exchanged in the social shared public domain. So let me start with my first example of how social capital is created and from there design opportunities are created. Social ecology is a space where a lot of social capital has got created. People appreciate, for example, the findings of the lessons of Buddha, Mahavira, Ashoka later on, and others have actually created this whole bank of social capital about the do's and don'ts of what you should do to nature. And obviously there are also the Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and many others who actually created parallel strands. Many of them were actually convergent, and the world today looks at it as social capital, and the world today is trying to see how they can actually imbibe values out of these. Now, if you were to treat this space as a space for social capital, and I say that this space is rife with design opportunities. How may we read this? Let me help you understand that. Okay, so let's take the example of social ecology. I talked of sacred forests, I talked about commons, and what I did not say at that time, and I said I'll talk to you later, is how there is a process of that goes across the centuries, where it starts with wanting to protect a forest. That is the intent of sustainability. And normally, if you try to give a lecture on sustainability, nobody's going to remember, nobody's going to care. So through across time, the idea of sustainability and conservation of resources takes on the form of storytelling, and then those storytelling turn into myths. The myths take on the form of iconographies, that is visual environment, and then they become abstract and they become symbols. So for example, the Purna Kalash is actually a symbol of fullness. You know, the tree of life, which is the Kalpa Briksha, that is so it would have been an iconography, which is the iconography of the butter rickshaw. And then in time, butter rickshaw would become a symbol of so many things. Butter rickshaw is actually a symbol of living ecology, because butter rickshaw has all kinds of organisms residing, where humans come and sit at the bottom. It's cooling, it's all of this, it's like a whole universe inside itself. And then those turn into ritualized behavior, which is, the behavior talked about, like we do rangoli to invite guests, and then we hang michi and lemon and all of that. So these are ritualized behavior, which then create these sacred spaces, and through that we create belief system. We come to believe that nobody has to tell us. It becomes tacit knowledge, and it just moves from generation to generation to generation. uh, and it no longer feels like you're actually doing sustainability. It feels like you're already in sacred space. Now, in this kind of social capital space, what would be the design opportunities? So I would suggest, for example, asking the question, how can we reimagine new ways to communicate the idea of sacred? As because the idea of sacred is actually the idea of commons, and why don't we make it modern and cool? And cool in the way that the millennial generation talks about it. And then you can think of a new communication system, design a new communication system with a core idea that it is a space that needs protection for greater good. That becomes your design objective. And then you could use all kinds of platforms and technologies. You could even take it to Insta without trivializing it, and maybe you will come up with something that will work very well through the design that you've come up with, and that would be a great example of social design. I take the example of Grameen Bank, which is this idea of microfinance that was invented, conceived by Mohammed Yunus. And he thought of the poorest of poor, and he felt that if you give a little bit of money in the hands of this woman, she goes buys a cow, she milks, she sells the milk, she makes a little money, and then she saves the money, she goes and buys another cow. And these are people who take this microfinance, and they will always return the money. Is the experience of the banks. They are not like the rich folks who run away with money. So Grameen Bank came in with a bank with this idea that you could actually empower the poorest of poor. Now, Grameen Bank has nothing to do with design. Designers never intervened, because it was Mohammed Yunus's idea. But he created this whole social capital of Grameen Bank. And design can pick up opportunities, and design solutions can actually plug into the central idea that it needs to restore a sense of dignity for the very economically disadvantaged, and who now feels dignified because he or she has a livelihood. Now, how can design help the whole process? Design can probably make the inventory system better. Design can actually come up with making the products of the banking products that these folks work with uh, more difficult, more accessible, and all that. And so this would be a way to actually Bill, come in with your intervention of design, social design. Let me give you a couple of. So should I just skip the designs, the design opportunities, Manish, if it is difficult for your audience? We can actually
मैम
end.
मुझे लगता है कि ऑडियंस आर कंफर्टेबल विथ यू इफ एनीवन हैव एनी क्वेश्चंस देन पुट इन द चैट बॉक्स and if hopefully there is no objection from the audience side.
So
It's
I
a
have,
pleasure to
I
listen.
have
Yeah.
Great, Manish, that's great. I have thanks audience for being such a wonderful audience. I have just a few more examples now. I'm going to move into starting from now. I'm going to give you real life examples. I gave the example of Grameen and Sacred Forest as two potent opportunities for designers to actually step in. You can actually, for example, you have this temple of Chidambaram. And there was this Aravindan, filmmaker from Kerala who made a film called Chidambaram around that temple. The temple of Chidambaram is a sacred, it is actually in the middle of sacred forest and mangroves. And it was one of those spots that the tsunami was not able to destroy. Now, today, you have mangroves being rampantly destroyed in Mumbai, because Mumbai had very rich mangrove forests. Is there a way design can step in to to figure platforms that are so powerful in its communication, in their communication, where they're able to actually convince people that if you kill mangroves, you die. It's not just the mangroves that have died. You've died. And the millennials are very on your face people. They are very good with making things obvious. So guys, you can design these platforms. You can actually approach these mangrove places, or corporations that try to manage these mangroves, and propose your designs, and you'll see that your designs will actually get accepted, and you will be pioneering in the way of actually supporting these very, very precious resources with social design inputs. So now let me come to the to my real life examples of social design. Let me come to my, let me now talk to you about uh, one second. Yeah, so now let me come to the idea of Creative Commons. This is a fantastic idea, Creative Commons, a term that was coined quite recently, not that long ago, because Creative Commons is an idea where uh, uh, inventions, ideas, traditional knowledge systems that lie in public domain, used by public, cannot be usurped and copyrighted by corporations. After what the American corporations tried to do with turmeric, it's called the Great Neem Robbery, the Great Turmeric Robbery, after what they tried to do. And Vandana Shiva and her cohorts fought it, saying that turmeric has been with households for millennia together. It is turmeric which they found to be antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. Turmeric is life-saving for communities that, communities where turmeric is available. And so you cannot, and today doctors have also found that if you take turmeric regularly from very young age, it actually stops Alzheimer, cumin and turmeric. So Vandana Shiva and a cohort say that you have absolutely no right to take away something from public domain, a knowledge system built by public across the centuries. And what you do is you just steal that, go copyright it, and then tomorrow I will have to buy turmeric from you at a cost that may no longer be affordable to me. And she fought in the Supreme Courts in the USA, and she won that battle. This was in the mid 90s. Now, from that came the idea of Creative Commons. So a lot of design for us is protected in Creative Commons. There is a site source where designs from artisans, designs from craftsmen, designs from painters, etc., are lodged on this source and are completely protected by Creative Commons. Creative Commons is says that you may use the design, but only for learning and teaching purpose. You may not use it for commercial purpose or to make a profit, which I think is a very fair exercise of rights. That means you're making your resources available without actually, without charging, but you're also ensuring that it is not being monetized. So I use this example in the context of, the honeybee project, where someone called Professor Anil Gupta of. It's all right, Amul. I will come to Amul because So let me show you the honeybee project, which was envisaged by Professor Anil Gupta from the Indian Institute of Management, and he actually he observed that, and he had spoken to a lot of farmers and others who had these ideas, the artisanal ideas about seeds, about farming equipments, implements, tools, etc., which were very novel. Their use on the field was very novel. And they had no means to actually copyright these. So Anil Gupta created the Honeybee Network, through which, through the principle of Creative Commons, uh, he started bringing in these projects and giving them acknowledgement. So if you're on the Honeybee Network, you're already acknowledged to be a project with a certain idea, a product with a certain idea, and you may not take that and use it. Okay, you have to take people's permission to use that, and even there you cannot use it to, commercialize for your own needs. So now, if you want to take the social capital created out of this endeavor, uh, I would ask the question in terms of design opportunities: how can we create a design framework that, of course, places ethics above economics, and that help guard the collective ownership that farmers, artisans, etc. have over traditional knowledge systems? In this regard, I would like to bring to your attention a very nice event called Traditional Science Congress that was held in IIT many years ago, and then it moved to IIT Madras, and it goes from university to university. And Manish, maybe if you can, find out about and host it at BHU. It is fantastic because it was at the Traditional Science Congress where I got to meet Sundarlal Bahuguna, Medha Patkar, all of these people. They were all there showing what they have, talking about it, and none of these things are copyrighted. And they were all saying, for example, the Chipko movement, it was one of the best ways to protect trees from getting felled. Now, you cannot copyright that, right? So it stays in public domain. Today, because of the increased capitalization of resources and this greed, this increased greed of institutions inside India, outside India, all of these things are under threat. Now, design can ask this question: how can design contribute to build a platform that effectively guards the collective ownership of this? Is there a way, because you work with so many different kinds of media, is there a way you can do that? Because if you did that, because Anil Gupta is always looking for help from designers. And if you want to do an internship, contact Professor Anil Gupta, find out how you can do that, and and be an ally of Anil Gupta. And whatever you design will become a pioneering initiative. So, and that would be social design in its truest meaning. Let me go to the next example, which is also on the ground. And by the way, Anil Gupta has taken design interventions from NID and IDC, and Mitti Cool, for example, was one of the initiatives that came out of the Honeybee project. So there are a lot of overseas students who've always been fascinated with the Honeybee project and have come and done the internships here. Let me now give the example of a social capital that was created by empowering people through social media and other technology infrastructures to protect communities from epidemics. In this case, it was the epidemic of mosquito and dengue. This was in Singapore. And this was part of a project where we were invited to set up innovation labs at the NTU and at NUS. the two universities, the two premium universities in Singapore that are like the equivalent of our IITs. And in one of the universities at NTU, where a lab was called Cosmic, which was a community of social media innovation, center of social media innovation for communities. The product called Mobus came out, a platform on social media where predictive technology was applied to sense malaria before it happened. So basically, you used, for example, the simple device of a mobile camera. I'm talking about 2010, 2011 when we were doing this. Use the simple device of a mobile camera, walked on roads and streets, and wherever you found pool of waters, you click that, and through geospatial coordinates, sent it to a platform where this information would actually get aggregated, and you would then know that a certain part of the, let's say, Bombay has too much water, and too many pools, and the next thing you know is that an epidemic is going to burst. And can you prevent that? You can prevent that through a platform like Mobus, where you send out messages to people saying, look, go clear the water, don't let the mosquitoes sit there, don't get into an epidemic. The other thing that Mobus did was to be able to sense which pharmacies were running out of medicines, because let's say Borivali has an epidemic of dengue and malaria. All the medicines are running out. Through predictive technology on Mobus, you could sense where there is no epidemic, and how could you actually transfer that medicine to the location of the epidemic. Basically, predictive technologies to help identify potential spots of infestation, and something like that could also be built for COVID. This is the time to step in to build design opportunities, which we did through a few, few competitions that we had announced on DSource. Uh, the next example is also from the Cosmic project in Singapore, where we built the design intention with the same set of social media and technology infrastructures, where we had the advantage of using vision technology, speech recognition technology, etc. And I'm just very pleased to say that the person we were working with, that we had invited to come over for a couple of months to work with us during summer, is today the director of IIT Bombay, Professor Subhashish Chaudhary, who's also a Bhatnagar Award winner and a big expert on vision technology. And he had helped us also to build Pavi. Pavi is so basically, first the design objective, where we ask the question, how can we reduce cognitive load on children and enhance their learning experience, and how can we do this in a shared learning environment, where children work with people they trust. So they don't trust parents. Parents are always, scolding them. They trust grandparents. Okay, they don't always trust their siblings, but they trust their peer group. So can there be, and can they work remotely through these technologies? And social media helps you work remotely. But after asking this question, our design intervention was spotting this design opportunity. Our design intervention was to build. So we also said that children are too cloistered in these digital environments and don't get to make anything anymore. So we came up with this idea that children would make their own puppet gloves. That's how the project gets its name, Pavi. And the gloves would have sensors through which they would talk to their grandparents living in some other city or some other house in the same city. And those through those puppets, you would exchange storytelling, and then grandparents would build their own puppets and send them across to children, and children would build theirs and send them to grandparents. So there would be a exchange of physical, tangible products which you made yourself, which is very good for the brain development of children. And you also have this shared learning space where through play you're learning so many things. Your grandparents have so many things to teach you, and they can do that through this kind of intervention. The next example that I would like to give is the example of, so we ask the question, we have all these technologies like AR, and so on. So we ask the question, can we, using technology, can we create shared public domain and a playful environment to communicate the importance of knowing our evolutionary origins and our biological connect to the biological connect to humans. So this, if you were to teach through textbook, children would just run away. The minds would run away. They would be sitting in the class and they would not be affected. So supposing I could actually build this on a shared public domain space where what we did was to build, and you can see that we used the tool of tessellation. There are 4 sets of tessellation here, all done by our project staff who were actually alumni of IDC animation students, and this was done under the project of we had started this project when we were at Cosmic, and the 4 sets of tessellations actually represent 4 sets of uh, evolutionary stages where, for example, the amoeba turned into the lobster turned into a fish, and the fish turned into the blue whale. And the blue whale, you know, is a mammal. So when you step onto this and you start walking around, all these things start coming out of the sea. And the idea was to also communicate that humans actually originated from under the sea, because we were actually these organisms before we, through very slow evolutionary process, became apes and then Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens. So it is very difficult to actually explain this idea also because you can see things under the sea. Whereas over here, you create on the floor this carpet, and as you walk, all these animals start coming out, all these organisms start coming out and then going back, and it's absolutely thrilling. And this was actually commissioned by the National Gallery of Modern Art. It stayed there for 2 months, and then we were invited by the International Science Congress in Calcutta, just before COVID. And we had like lakhs of school and college children and ministers and all come and walk around and be absolutely thrilled. And we were then invited to set this up at the DST headquarters, a building, a new building. And then COVID happened, and we will probably take it up later. But the idea is that here was a design opportunity given the available technologies. We spotted them and we built a social design solution because it can be on any big public space and it is robust enough for children and others to walk around and experience how life evolved and how beautiful it is, and you get a glimpse of what happens under the sea. Let me now turn to my next example, which is interactive Gandhi. And in that, interactive Gandhi is actually a timeless proposition. Gandhi is a timeless proposition, except that what happened with Gandhi was that you were not able to, the present generation, the young generation could no longer relate themselves to Gandhi because all kinds of stereotypes were there about Gandhi. Gandhi, the naked fakir, Gandhi, this guy who only talks about building rural economies and he's on the charkha and all that. And the question that, but the social capital that had got built through Gandhi, and we today know that we sit on $1 billion worth of social capital just from the entity of Gandhi, and yet the young do not identify with Gandhi. So we were actually invited by the Ministry of Culture and asked how can we revive and regenerate the whole idea so that the young can actually embrace Gandhi as being their own. He becomes like Shah Rukh Khan, or he becomes like an icon that you actually, or like a cricketer that you identify with. So the question that, as a design opportunity, the question that we asked was that can we recognize the stereotypes that are dismissed, Gandhi being one of them, and can we see Gandhi? And these stereotypes of being, the stereotype of Gandhi being old and irrelevant to our present context. Can we recontextualize the inherent value learning potential and revamp and port the learning content in Gandhi onto new media platforms. So actually, if you look at this image, it's a very large image which is built of small squares, and they're like pixels. And each small square tells a story of Gandhi at some point of time of life. And this is a touch interface. So if you touch that particular square, it opens up and it shows you Gandhi with Kasturba, or another, touch another square, it's like Gandhi with Nehru, another one where Gandhi on Dandi March. So each of, and then they go to form this collective Gandhi. And, you can spend endless amount of time just doing this, because each square has also annotated information. So it's also good for scholars, it is good for school children, it's good for college kids. This was also set up at the science exhibition, and it was such a big hit. Like, you had young children spending hours, and we also turned Gandhi stories we related them in different ways by making graphical cards and all that. And you can actually access the website and enjoy for yourself. So interactive Gandhi was one other real life social design intervention. Uh, Let me go to the next one, which is the idea of building self-learning, augmentative, assistive platforms for acute disability conditions. This is a project called Jello, which is actually a startup for which we had won the UNICEF Innovation Funds Award and the President's Award. Very proud to say that felt really good to receive this national award from the hands of the president. But anyway, the opportunity, this was actually part of the Microsoft Expo. And this was done years ago in 2004. It went into backburn. And then later on, when we were in Singapore, we decided to prototype it because it was so much easier to do it in Singapore. The question we asked here was, can we build self-learning augmentative assistive platforms for acute disability conditions? In this case, the disability conditions being cerebral palsy, autism, dyslexia, etc. And this is for children. So so of course we built Jello, and today we've kept part of Jello as free to use, and it's a live product, and you can go to jello.org and check it out. Uh, I will end with one more set of example, which is in the domain of science learning, and two very eminent people, fantastic people. One is Arvind Gupta, who's won all kinds of awards, including, I think, the Padma Shri. He's an engineer who says that he was never interested in studies in school, and he comes from a very poor family. So his mother used to wait for him every day to come home, and she would always ask, "Beta, aaj kya kiye school pe, kya kya, etc., etc." And Arvind Gupta says she never ever pressured him to to produce results. She was like, if you're enjoying, I'm good with that. She came from a very poor family. Says that in spite of that, she never pressured him. As a result, his mind became very free, and he turned into an engineer. And very soon, he started tinkering around with trash material. And with that, he started building toys. And because he's an engineer and he knows science, he started building toys, do-it-yourself toys with which you can understand science principles. So, Manish, you may want to actually invite Arvind Gupta, and we can help you do that. And you can do an online session. We did it for our Designing for Children. It's absolutely fabulous. And we can request Arvind Gupta to have a session with you. We will do that.
Communication is under process, ma'am. So हम Anil sir and Arvind sir, both sir.
Because you can do it under your DIC, right? Yeah, right. And of course, Manish, you can help him do some of the, some design interventions. We are also trying to do that. Now, in the case of Arvind Gupta, where he builds toys out of trash, it is so rife with design opportunities. First of all, he has created social capital by building all these toys, by doing them into DIY. But the problem is that these materials are not sturdy, and they don't also look very good, and people may not be interested in doing it. So it is rife with design opportunities where designers can step in, take it up for materials understanding, material science understanding, as well as for material intervention, as well as for product design, and build them into beautiful DIY sets, which can also be exported, right? So it becomes a great social entrepreneurship project. And it's not possible for Arvind Gupta to do all that because he's done the social capital. Now it is our job to help out with design. I also cite the example of a scientist, again a scientist who is also a very well-known person called Dr. Vivek Montero, again a fantastic person who had done his PhD in physics, studied at Caltech, and apparently at the age of 20, comes from a very wealthy family from Goa. At the age of 22, Vivek had this, I've heard this, his family has told me, he had this vision that he needs to go back and serve people. And he was in USA at Caltech. Nobody ever comes back. He finished his studies, he finished his master's, PhD, everything, came back to India. At that time, TIFR was starting an extension set up in Goa. So they put him there. And then he decided that he was going to build toys through which you can do science learning. And he used the simple device of the straw with which you drink Coca-Cola, etc. And with that straw and a set of joinery, he actually builds to show how nucleides are formed, enzymes are formed, all these complex chemical propositions are formed. And apparently, children, and we've been working with Navnirmiti for 25 years. And I'll tell you what design opportunities we have actually grabbed in the context of Navnirmiti. They're actually our family. So these toys, these structures are actually, they're like geodesic structures which are DIY. You build them yourselves, and right from children to nuclear scientists at BRC use these toolkits, and they are very easily available, very inexpensive. We had done the packaging for these toolkits to to make them look attractive, and the interfacing between the user and the product, and the sales had actually gone through the roof because of the packaging. And so that felt really good, that design's intervention helped. We also have tried to help out with making the straw more robust, the joineries more robust. And once again, Manish, recently for designing for children, Dr. Vivek Montero and Arvind Gupta were back to back. And Vivek and Arvind, they draw inspiration from each other. And Vivek is also this very inspiring, soft-spoken, gentle, quiet person. And you know who he is? He's the CPM head of Bombay. And he's always out there doing morcha and all that. And then here is this quiet person. He's always on time. He lives in a chawl, although he's come from a very wealthy background. He invested his life with common people. He moved out of his house. He lives in a chawl. I've been there because we've invited him. We've involved him with all our projects, and we also collaborate with him on so many things. And I've gone there and I've seen him in the single room, eating roti sabji in the morning with so many people milling around, no privacy, nothing. He's a very happy man. He lives his life the way he said he will. And I asked Vivek recently at the conference itself, Vivek, how do you do so many things? And he says, Ajanta, it's possible because he has a whole setup where these straws are built. There are all these toys he does, and does all these demonstration of passage of Venus, passage of this, solar eclipses, all that. And he said that, I have teams, and we work with those teams, but he acknowledged his debt of gratitude to the team with so much humility. So anybody who wants to pick up a design opportunity in the context of Navnirmiti, you will find it so gratifying to work with that team, and you can also work online. You let us know, and we can put you across to Navnirmiti. Now, these are all examples of social design that I have highlighted for you. They are designs active on the ground, being appreciated by people, being used by people, and the reward is the use of the design is its own reward. If it happens that you have been recognized with awards, it's fine. But it is so gratifying that people are using your design that you will actually forget about awards. Whereas if you look at design, it's a very egoistic discipline. You build something and you wait for an award, and you wait for everybody to say, oh, wow, you're so fantastic. This whole iconic thing, oh, so and so is at the top of his game because he's an iconic designer. But social design is a different kind of domain, and you remove yourself away from all that bluster and all that clutter, and you build a mindset where you go one with around reality, one with people, and what you build, when you build these things, you also get a lot of help from people. So I will now conclude my session by asking a very potent question. It's just one question, and which is that I ask, what is that singular factor that gives a culture like India and similar cultures elsewhere, such as in South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, etc.? What is that singular factor that gives a culture like India its agency for pursuing social design to great success? What is that one singular factor? Can someone tell me what that singular factor is? Keep it on hospital graphics. Keep it on hospital graphics. Yeah. What is that singular factor? And there is no wrong answer, by the way. I've told you about, I'll give you clues. It's how you feel your way through many of these things. You know, for example, let me give you an example. When there is newspaper on the ground, you will never stamp on it, right? You will pick it up, maybe crumple it, and carefully, put it somewhere. But you will never stamp on a piece of paper, whether newspaper, whether anything. Why? Because paper represents for us Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge. When there is rice on the floor, you will never use a broomstick to sweep that rice. You will get a cloth, you will gather up the rice, and you will carefully put it away, because that rice represents Annapurna. Now, this information that rice is represented by Annapurna is simply transporting rice, which is actually the essential nutrient of our life. Is we transport rice through Annapurna to a sacred space so that we are respectful of rice. We are respectful of the tools of learning. We are respectful of wisdom from Saraswati, then wealth from Lakshmi, and things like that. So it comes from where? It comes from a very deep sense of intuition that is based on knowledge. Certainly it's based on knowledge, but it is based on tacit knowledge. And before I missed this example. Let me just complete this example, and I will go back to tacit knowledge. The hospital graphics project you see here is a fantastic project. It was actually built by Professor Ravi Puvaya in 1982 under a DST project grant or something, and he actually used the KEM for his user studies, etc. And he realized that if I can build a signage system for a hospital like KEM in Bombay, which is the King Edward Memorial Hospital, which is one of the largest hospitals in the world, it's certainly the largest in Asia. It's one of the most complex hospitals. It is also one of the most well-equipped hospitals in Asia. And it is a hospital where from the poor to rich, everybody comes because it has some of the most fantastic doctors. So my sister, she had done her medical studies there. She's a cardiologist, and she says that you would have these very poor, load-bearing Mathari workers, because it is in Dadar, and that's where these load-bearing people work, and they'll come and they'll say, my sister says, I realize he has hernia. Now he's not supposed to lift load, but I will not tell him to not lift load, because if I say that, he will be shattered psychologically. So I will have to deal with it in a different way. This is the way treatment is done in KEM. It's a people's hospital, and Professor Buvaya realized that people from all over the country come here, so it had to be appropriate for multilinguality. It had to be appropriate for illiteracy. It had to be appropriate for crowds, so that you could go past the crowd and be able to see all that. And this was so many years ago, for the first time that hospital graphics were actually designed this comprehensively, and he put it in public domain. In those days, Creative Commons was not yet there, but he put it in public domain. And one by one, and he said, my only request is that you do not, you give it for free, use it for free. Do not commercialize it, and just acknowledge that it has been done at IDC so that people know its provenance, its origin. And today, across the last 30, 40 years, it has been adopted by hospitals in Russia, Brazil, even the the tube, the metro rail in Delhi. So many hospitals in the country, outside the country, in Africa, etc., have actually taken the hospital graphics. My point of contention is not Professor Puvaya. I'm mentioning that because you know about Professor Puvaya. He's right here. That's why. But otherwise, it is not about Professor Puvaya. Otherwise, it is actually uh, the driver of this project is the fact that there was very successful, appropriate user studies that established for him information that helped him get it right. And then, because he got it right, it acquired universal value, and it spread across different hospitals in different parts of the world. And that gives you a sense of gratification, and it becomes a great fulfillment, for a sense of fulfillment for hospital graphics. So that was actually my last example of design opportunity and a complete social design project. Now let me go back to that question. The question, that singular factor that I'm talking about, is tacit knowledge. Our culture's ability to process tacit knowledge, and I won't say our culture's ability to build tacit knowledge. We do not directly build tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge keeps growing. It's like amoeba, it just grows. And we don't even realize. And that is also a problem with tacit knowledge, that you don't if you're not used to tacit knowledge, you don't know how to process it. But we have grown up learning to process it, and this ability of our culture to process tacit knowledge, um, which is a form of knowledge that has got embedded into our ground reality across the millennia. And it has taken on the form of all these symbols, myths, all the things that I said under sacred forest. The all that is tacit knowledge that has got built into different domains of our everyday life. Now I say, to ignore this great evolutionary force and turn to a limited proposition of social design being floated in the West would be to actually undermine yourself. So what you need to do is you pick up what you can from wherever it comes. You should always pick up from things from wherever they come, expose yourself to it, but do not take that as your primer. You need to understand that you're actually sitting in the world capital of sustainability. You're sitting in households where, for generations together, through tacit knowledge, you have actually learned these things. We don't even talk about sustainability because it is meant to be done. And so, if you have such a rich heritage of tacit knowledge inside your system, then your ability to look at a problem uh, by intuiting and feeling uh, is fantastic. But then it also creates challenges, because tacit knowledge always creates an environment of fuzziness and chaos. And I keep going back to this fantastic writer, fantastic designer, Alan Fletcher, who passed away quite suddenly of cancer in 2006. And thank goodness he left behind this book called The Art of Looking Sideways, where he says he recognizes this propensity for restlessness in cultures like ours. And he says, very humorously, that civilization is nothing but chaos taking a rest, which means that a country like India, which is known for its civilization, has chaos, because civilization, is not. It's not like you have to be so intellectually proud all the time. You can also live in chaos, and if you can deal with it, then you deal with it. And it is very difficult for a lot of a mechanistic society folks to actually deal with this kind of chaos. So, in India, we'll say, you'll step into a professor's room and he'll say, "Sir, I just need 2 minutes," and then you'll spend some half an hour. Because your 2 minutes is not actually 2 minutes. You just want his attention. You grab his attention, sit there, you start talking. This will not do in the West. You'll have to take their appointment. You'll have to go there. The guy will give you 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, you have to buzz off. Now, this is a kind of social capital and a fuzzy environment in which we work. It has both its problems and challenges, and it has its opportunities as well. So, within this context, I want to show how the West has actually started looking at tacit knowledge as a counterintuitive proposition. Just the facts and just 4 or 5 examples from the impacts that I talked about. First of all, cybernetics. A hardcore computational stream like cybernetics was able to actually intellectually partner with ecology to understand how to contain environmental damage. That was cybernetics' way of trying to see how they can get into tacit knowledge domain, which is social. Everything is all actually tacit. There's no written textbook which says this is how you develop social skills, this is how you do interpersonal relationship, this is how you work together. So it's a difficult thing to actually deal with tacit knowledge, and they recognize that the whole idea of human ecology is based on tacit knowledge. Bill Buxton, whose three mirrors of interaction that I showed, talks about sensory as one of the spaces of interaction, where some time ago you never talked about, technologists never talked about sensories. But now they're building, Bill Buxton himself, along with his cohorts at Xerox PARC, they were responsible for all these gesture technologies coming out of Xerox PARC. And today we have all of that. And of course, he recognizes this whole idea of, so they have actually attributed the sensory domain with so many different kinds of, technologies that imitate our sensories. But he also recognizes this proposition of social skills being, very fuzzy and difficult. And unless you put it down, you will not begin to build it. So that's why he split the whole computational proposition into cognitive, social, and sensory, saying that that technologies need to be built for all three spaces. Then, of course, the economist from the West, Eleanor Ostrom, was so inspired by the idea of commons that she made, build mathematical calculations through which she was able to establish that the best way to protect commons was through self-organizing, groups of individuals. We have not been able to do that. She was, because she used her Western logical structures of mathematics and economics to do that. Whereas we, sitting inside tacit knowledge, do not actually, we're not very good at doing it. We say, okay, pata hai kya kar rahe hum log. You somehow know it. Then I will give the example of technology. I've already said technology increasing the agency of sensory that Buxton talked about. And lastly, Papanek, he actually uses the words human ecology. And he also says that, somewhere in his book, he says that through the dynamics of human ecology, we need to, pursue the idea of the ideal human system. And these are notions that actually lie in tacit domain. So now the West has actually taken a step forward and tried to understand tacit knowledge as a counterintuitive proposition. And what are we doing? We're not doing very well all the time. So if you look at so for example, we've done very well, for example, when POSCO, the Korean company, huge, giant company, mining company that came and settled down in Orissa, in this remote Orissa, hilly part, and started mining the hill. The tribals formed. It was like Chipko movement. They went and fought with POSCO and made sure, it took them 10 years, but Moscow had to leave because they said, you cannot touch our sacred mountain. This is our sacred mountain. You cannot touch it. And POSCO had to leave after investing billions of dollars there. But our Indians, who are mining giants in Australia, like the Vedant Group, etc., they have been mining, and now the Aboriginal Australians have come and asked them to leave. So it's not like, we are gods. We have our own frailties. So what I'm trying to say is that let us try to understand what our strengths are and let us build on those strengths. We have enough strength where social design is concerned. All we have to do is look into all the different systems we've built and understand the social capital component of it, and then identify the design opportunities out of that. So I have completed what I needed to say. I may have missed out things here and there, but Manish, I'm prepared to answer questions.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thanks a lot. It's really very amazing and knowledgeable lecture. Thank you,
Most of the-
participants also. You guys
Yes,
showing
thank
your
you, participants.
lots of patience also.
Yes,
That's great.
lots of patience.
And they continue listening you because the lecture was really amazing. If possible, please ask one or two questions or maybe three, four. If that will enrich others also. Please ask.
You
ऐसे तो मैम
actually,
रिस्पॉन्स
you don't
ओनली फॉर द एक्सीलेंट एंड थैंक्स के लिए आ रहा है इट वाज रियली अमेजिंग लेकिन अगर
actually
कोई प्रश्न पूछेगा तो दैट्स वेरी गुड
No, actually, you don't have to ask me a question regarding what I have spoken. You can talk
या
about your experience about these things. There is no need to,
या
we can have a discussion. No need for question answer, Manish. I would also like to understand
या
when
इट्स अ
you say,
डिस्कशन टाइप
right?
ऑफ थिंग या
Like Manish, maybe you can start. You live in Varanasi and you tell me about, your experience of where you grew up, and then the group can, join in and we would
इट्स
like to know your experiences,
मैं
right?
मैं थोड़ा सा बचता हूँ अपने बारे में बताने को क्योंकि बाकी लोगों के लिए भी बहुत सारी चीजें हैं ऐसे कॉमन मैन हो लेकिन यहाँ पे बनारस में रहने के बाद जो बनारस का इतिहास है या जो समझते हैं हम लोग तो अभी 40-45 के ही हैं लेकिन जो सुना जाता है कि भाई 4,000-5,000 साल पुरानी संस्कृति है और जो जो एक कल्चर डेवलप हुआ है बनारस में वो बाद में एक मिनी इंडिया का भी रूप हो गया और ये एक बात बहुत आश्चर्यचकित करती है कि बहुत सारी चीजें बनारस में ही क्यों तो ये एक सोशल डिजाइन का बड़ा की पॉइंट है जिसपे हम और हमारी टीम सोचती रहती है चाहे वो बुद्ध का आगमन हो चाहे वो कबीर हो चाहे रैदास हो चाहे नानक का आना हो सब जगह भी गए हैं बहुत सारी जगहों पे गए हैं लेकिन कुछ तो चीज अलग करती है दुनिया में बनारस को कि इंडिया में तो स्पेशली क्यों बनारस और जो बहुत बड़ा लास्ट ट्रूथ है इट्स हार्ट क्या बोल सकते हैं कि हार्ट पॉइंट ऑफ आवर लाइफ द लास्ट मोमेंट ऑफ द लाइफ ऑल्सो वो भी एज ए सेलिब्रेशन है रिसेंटली मैं देख रहा था अभी आज के अखबार में कि बहुत सारे ऐसे अच्छे इंसिडेंट्स नहीं हो रहे हैं किसी के भी लाइफ में किसी का जाना अच्छा नहीं होता है लेकिन उसके बाद भी उस घाट पे कल डांस हो रहा है प्रोग्राम हो रहा है और सेलिब्रेशन हो रहा है बाबा भोलेनाथ के लिए तो ये सब जो सोशल कल्चर बना हुआ चाहे उसके पीछे विश्वास हो चाहे अंधविश्वास हो अंधविश्वास और विश्वास एक ही सिक्के के दो पहलू है मैं ऐसा मानता हूँ थोड़ी सी लाइन है वो आदमी मन है तो कुछ न कुछ मानना पड़ेगा तो इन सारी चीजों में मैं सोचता हूँ तो लगता है कि बनारस एक सोशल डिजाइन के एस्पेक्ट से समझने वाला बहुत जबरदस्त स्पेशली कल्चर डिजाइन तो मैं हम लोग कभी ऐसे बच्चों के साथ बातचीत करते थे तो होता था कि हाउ टू रीडिजाइन आवर कल्चर
Yes.
पूजा पाठ का एक तरीका बन गया है मतलब सब फॉलो करते हैं हम भी करते हैं रोज उठना है पूजा पाठ करना है एक डर लगा रहता है गंगा जी जाना लेकिन हम ये कैसे डिजाइन हुआ ऑटोमेटिकली डिजाइन हुआ प्लस कैसे हम इसमें इसमें रीडिजाइन का रिस्क कैसे ले सकते हैं क्योंकि ये बड़ा सेंसिटिव इशू भी होता है पर इस पर बात करनी चाहिए ये मुद्दा है तो बनारस मुझे लगता है कि सोशल डिजाइन के रिलेवेंस में बहुत जबरदस्त रोल प्ले करता है अभी बहुत सारी चीजें अनछुई हैं बनारस के नजरिए से तो ये सोचने
There
समझने का
are,
प्रयास है हम लोग कर रहे हैं
I would like to add, I, I am a classmate of Manish, and right now we've been discussing this social design thing for the past days. So, like Manish said, Banaras, we had a session with Dr. Singh on this day two of there is symposium going on social design. Dr. Singh explained to us how the construct of the Varanasi city and in some very nicely illustrated diagrams and maps, he showed us what the kind of structure the city has. The power of the city lies in its construct. I know there are scientific reasons behind that, and the as you said, tacit knowledge I
Mm.
totally agree, and I totally applaud this part of your presentation, tacit knowledge. I have seen people in Varanasi. It is this kind of knowledge is abundant in this city, and I think this makes this city a wonderful tourist city.
Mm.
Despite its chaos and
Mm.
disorder, everything is there, but
Mm.
it is a wonderful place, full of elements of design which take it forward amidst the chaos
Mm.
which is there. Thanks, ma'am.
So, addressing Manish, and what's your name?
My name is
What?
Padmaja.
Padmaja. So, Padmaja and Manish, to both of you, one thing I wanted to mention, but I didn't have the context to mention. One of the problems of tacit knowledge, and I was mentioning this in my design thinking course last week. One of the problems of tacit knowledge is that uh, the solver of the problem does not see the underlying process. There is a process, but the solver doesn't see it. Now, it is possible that if we take a mechanistic mindset, the logocentric mindset of the West, that we are able to dissect it and understand. So, I've actually come up with a model. I can do that sometime with you, Manish. There's a process, there's a 9-point process that I take them through, where it starts with the brain to sensory to, and all the things that plays out in your daily life, and that can become your process. Now, supposing you were to assume that you have a process, and you take Banaras as the canvas. You said something very interesting, Manish, that from Buddha to Kabir, all of them have come to Banaras. So first, there is this outside in understanding. What is that? Diana L calls it sacred geography. What is that thing about the place that attracts people to come? I mean, there must be something, right? Uh, in Buddha's time, there was no tourist board, written, आ जाइए यहाँ पे, है ना? वो तो नहीं था. फिर भी वो आए. And I think either Diana writes or Mark Tully writes that when Buddha came to Banaras, he saw the trading that happens in Banaras, and it's a very vibrant part of Banaras, and he was quite affected by that. So the little time that he spent there, he actually tried to understand that part of Banaras that a lot of people don't know about, right? So actually, Banaras can be like this is brain mapping project that Paul Allen had started. Paul Allen being the partner of founding member of Microsoft, and uh, after he left Microsoft as a billionaire, he spent his money in a lot of very meaningful activities. One of them being the experience art. The experience EMP, the experience music project, where he built an interactive music. He funded the building of an interactive setup in Seattle to house the music of Jimi Hendrix and all of them. So I've been there, and the architects were Frank Gehry. So Paul Allen was like an eccentric person. He used to live on an island of Seattle, and he used to live with his mother. So what he did was he actually invited top brain experts from around the world onto his yacht. He said, "We will not be on ground. We will be on the yacht, and you will be on the yacht with me for like 14 days. And I want you top people to talk to each other to find out what is that mystery of the brain because you can't cut a brain to dissect, right? Then the person is dead. You can only cut a dead man's brain. What is a live man's brain like? Only a rat, from a rat's brain you can make out. So the brain project, mapping of the brain project, took on a very sharp, very focused, serious turn. And I bring that as an analogy for Banaras, where it can be like the mapping of the brain project. You have the mapping of Varanasi, where you have a cultural mapping, you have time mapping, space mapping, historical mapping. You have this phylogenetic mapping, right? The phylogenetic mapping, because Ganga is one of the oldest entities on earth, and yet Ganga is actually new, because if you look at the phylogenetic time frame, then tertiary system, which is Himalayas, and the start of Ganga is actually the newest system, and that's why there's earthquakes, because it's always in revulsion. So these kind of concepts, actually you can actually take up a Varanasi project. You could even talk to the Ministry of Culture, take up the Varanasi as a project, and split it into I was going to talk about it, I didn't. Split it into spaces. You split it into sacred spaces, technology spaces, uh, taking your cues from the way Varanasi is. So, same thing, Padmaja, actually, I mean, Varanasi, they say that, Mark Tully says, I think, that Varanasi is one of the oldest cities in the world, along with Beijing and Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Beijing and Jerusalem. So there is that history also. There's a civilizational history also. There is also the syncretic culture, and although it's they say that the iconic Hindu god Shiva is there, but actually the city's population of Muslims are the ones who do the Banarsi saris, which we wear, right? Hindus wear. Now, can you imagine the intersections? So you can actually do beautiful mapping. You can do, in that you can actually try and list tacit knowledge, put them as keywords, draw them as little icons, do network mapping. There's so many things that you can do. You can also propose this as a project to Ministry of Culture, because you are at BHU, Manish, and they will, and right now the secretary, Raghavinder Singh, is a very nice secretary. He's actually cultural intrigue. He has deep interest in culture. He's not just a bureaucrat. So you guys sit around and discuss, and he understands these things. All this tacit knowledge and all, he understands. So yeah, I'm very happy
Thank you,
to,
ma'am.
yeah, very happy to hear what you
मुझे
just said. So
Ma'am,
complex
Thank you,
also.
thank
hello.
you. Yeah, Padmaja, please.
Hello,
Ah,
ma'am. This is Divyambari Saxena. I'm from second year, Lucknow College of Arts and Crafts. I'm pursuing fine arts from
hi,
here.
hi, Divya.
Hello, ma'am. I have two things to say. Ma'am, first of all, definitely, I loved your workshop. And ma'am, since I am from the budding generation, and we have to understand that how important the social design is from the and different it from the selfish designs that people are doing these days. And
Yes, indeed,
those
indeed.
things. Ma'am, I want to ask that how do we take the first step?
Okay. Uh,
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I outlined a few first steps, but I'm very happy you asked this. But before that, I want to say, when you say you're the budding generation, it is also, people express a lot of exasperation. Oh, they don't read, or they have no, they have attention deficit, all that. But let me tell you, we also consider your generation to be a more honest generation. You're more honest in your expression of thoughts, and I have not seen so many young people involved with social design across all these years I was also a student, and I was a student at IIT, and we in the
Yes,
way that this space, social design space, has now attracted the young is quite remarkable. And uh, the young are very brave. So they don't understand fear so much, like children, which is a good thing actually. So they can take risks. So the
right,
all you have to do is look at, you can make a compendium, a list of all the different social projects that pop up on social media, Instagram, etc. Take a look at them, okay? And then
right,
right, and then you ask, what is it that you as Divyambari like to do? You want to do social design, but what sector, what captures you? Do you like art? Do you like cooking, kitchen? Do you like the artisanal space? What space actually moves you? And then you do that, because then you can be completely immersed in what you're doing. And I'll tell you, every space today requires intervention. And today, our whole, India has changed so much today that when we were growing up, our elders used to say, now you guys keep quiet, we will talk. Okay, now when we have become older, the young look at us and say, now you keep quiet and we will talk. So a lot of my friends from the Silicon Valley and also my classmates at IT, they say, Ajanta, we are like the sandwich generation, माँ बाप भी डांट देते हैं, अभी बच्चे भी हमें डांट देते हैं. Like, बच्चे इसलिए डांटते हैं कि वो लोग ना, उनका बहुत क्लियर कंसेप्शन है, चाहे राइट हो चाहे रॉन्ग हो, पर है क्लियर कंसेप्शन, वो ऑडेसिटी भी है. लाइक
जी मैम.
होना है, ऑडेसिटी ऑफ होप, वो भी तो है आप में. हम लोग तो डरते थे बहुत, तो आपके आपके पास वो भी है. आपके पास टेक्नोलॉजी है, राइट. आपके पास सेल्फ ड्रिवन टेक्नोलॉजी, क्योंकि टेक्नोलॉजी अभी डेमोक्रेटिक बन गए हैं. यू कैन सेल्फ पब्लिश, you can self create, you can do so many things, right? And through Instagram, you can reach any part of the world. Like for example, I'm just trying to get a hang of Instagram. And one of the places where I actually post is Center Pompidou. And every time I post a comment, they write back to me saying that we actually, really appreciate what you've written. And then I like going there again. And like that, I have access to, designers like Diane von Furstenberg and, amazing Nat Geo stuff. And it's a different world on Instagram. Likewise, there are other social media platforms where you can actually reach out to
Hmm.
converse, and you can pick and choose. You can actually get in touch with, you have the audacity, you go get in touch with who you want to work with. Just write to them. Say, I want to work with you, or I want to, intervene to do design. Like I said, mangroves. If you write
Right.
to Mumbai Municipal Corporation saying, I will do something about your mangroves. And there are so many people working in that area, so many NGOs, they will grab you for your design inputs.
I've definitely taken a note of it. I will contact more people and work on my designs, my ideas, and I have understood your point, and I will definitely read about the authors. I have noted down everything that you were saying. I will read on it. I will research on it. And ma'am, one more thing, ma'am, I was very little. I attended this a train. It was 150th anniversary of Rabindranath Tagore's birthday.
Ah, yes.
Uh, Ma'am, I do not remember exactly everything very clearly. I was very young at that time. So, sir's point was that BHU's heritage, he wants to promote it. So, what I feel personally is that that idea suddenly hit my head, that if he, you know, tries to contact with the uh, cultural area of the city, and they can somehow arrange some kind of that activity for general people, so people can actually interact. And the train is the most beautiful thing I feel in
Yeah,
India.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great metaphor. It's a great physical artifact and a great metaphor. It's it's
Right,
it's
ma'am.
it's a, it's an astounding metaphor. I mean, if you are fond of trains, you should get in touch with the railways. The headquarters of Western Railway is Churchgate, and Central Railway is actually VT. And when we were doing EcoGrada Design Week, and we had taken, it was the 150th year of VT, and VT had also been given the UNESCO Heritage, slot. So we were doing EcoGrada Design Week, and we took design. What is that? Design local, stops at all stations was the theme and logo. And so we said, and Prahlad Thakkar, you've heard of Prahlad Thakkar, the media person, right? So I had gone and met with many of them, and Prahlad Thakkar came up with this fantastic idea. He said, Ajanta, why don't you people do फूड फेस्टिवल ऑन वीटी। रात को जब लोग घर वापस जाते हैं, कुछ लोग रह जाते हैं, और शहर के लोग तो वहाँ पे वीटी पे घूमने भी आते हैं ना, शहर को एशियाटिक लाइब्रेरी आते, बीच पे आते, मरीन ड्राइव आते। तो आप वहाँ पे 8-9 बजे के बाद फेस्टिवल करो, फूड फेस्टिवल, and people from different parts of the country will come, and on the days of Ecograda Design Week, the food festival can highlight also the premises of the station. So
Right.
I had right. So I had this this lovely friend, Shankar Menon, who used to be. Shankar Menon was my mentor, like many years older. He used to be the municipal corporation, the commissioner of Aurangabad, and he started the Ajanta festival. Then he started the Elephanta festival. He was the one who helped build that product design library. What is that in Pune? There's a famous product design library. So he was ever ready to help. So, and he was such an honest man that he could not take that corruption anymore. He was a principal secretary to the chief minister, and he resigned. And from then onwards, he says, I'm going to play golf and I'm going to do what I feel like. And we happened to meet, and he helped me go to VT and meet the top people. And I had prepared the proposal, I had gone and I had tied it up with IIT being 50 years and VT being 150 years, and I made it very poetic. And the top people actually loved the idea, and they immediately said yes. And Shankar Menon and I came out, and Shankar Menon in the balcony itself, veranda itself, said, "How is it possible? They never give permission for anything, and they just gave you permission to do a food festival down there." And we were all getting ready. जब वो bomb blast हुई ना, no sorry, the bomb blast had already got 2006 में एक bomb blast हुई थी ना,
Yes,
and there
ma'am.
was intense security, and we knew they were going to say no to us. But Shankar said, फिर भी जाके देखते ना. We went there, they saw a proposal, and also because of IIT, they said करो. And we came down, and Shankar said, my God, they've said yes. So abhi kar lete. And Lalu Prasad was the railway minister. So then it was like Lalu Prasad को बुलाना पड़ेगा inauguration के लिए. ये मंजूर नहीं, उनको नहीं बुलाएंगे. And then it went on to that level, and then we were all preparing for that, and things like that. So I'm saying that you can actually, you needn't feel contained by any of this. If you have an idea, just go. And today it's a lot easier to meet people, and people are also much more respectful of the young than they were of us when we were growing up. तो आपके
Right,
लिए
ma'am.
सब कुछ काफी सही है. आपके पास टेक्नोलॉजी भी है,
Right.
आपका सोशल सपोर्ट स्ट्रक्चर्स भी है, पेरेंट्स है, सब कुछ है. तो जो करना है करो. अगर कुछ मदद चाहिए तो हम भी, whatever way we can help, we will also help you.
थैंक
Right,
यू.
ma'am. Thank you so
थैंक यू
much, ma'am.
मैम.
Thank
और थैंक यू बेटा. मैं बताना चाहूंगा कि यहाँ जितने भी लोग हैं, अगर कोई किसी भी तरीके का काम करना चाहता हो जिसकी पहली प्रायोरिटी पैसा कमाना नहीं होना चाहिए, तो उसके लिए आपका मनीष अरोड़ा के पास और मैम के पास स्वागत है. मैं खुद भी मैक्सिमम मेरे 100% जो काम है वो सेल्फ ओरिएंटेड है, और मैं ज्यादा अपने बारे में नहीं बता रहा, लेकिन जो भी काम कर रहा हूँ सोसाइटी के बारे में कर रहा हूँ. कभी आपको जरूरत हो तो अभी भी मेरे पास 10-12 प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, और मैं उन्हीं बच्चों के साथ काम करता हूँ जो खुद आते हैं काम मांगने के लिए. मैं किसी को बुलाता नहीं, किसी को पास जाऊंगा नहीं, क्योंकि वो फिर कॉमर्शियल एस्पेक्ट्स हो जाता है, और एज एन एकेडमिशियन होने के बाद थोड़ा फाइनेंशियल बचता हूँ, नहीं तो उसके थ्रू मेंटल पोजीशन थोड़ी डिफरेंट हो जाती है, क्योंकि हम एक्सपीरियंस कर चुके हैं. जब पढ़ते थे तब पैसा क्या रोल प्ले करता था पढ़ाई में, और एज एन एकेडमिशियन बनने के बाद पैसा क्या रोल प्ले करता है. तो काम बहुत सारे हैं. भारत सरकार पिछले 5-6 साल से बहुत जबरदस्त काम कर रही है. आप काम कीजिए, पैसा भारत सरकार करोड़ों रुपए दे रही है. आपके अंदर जज्बा होना चाहिए लेने का, और मेंटरशिप के लिए हम लोग अवेलेबल हैं, कोई कभी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. इस कॉन्फ्रेंस के बाद जब भी आप चाहें, व्हाट्सएप इज द इजी मोड टू कनेक्ट विथ मी, और उसके बाद आप बात करते रहिए. कुछ ग्रुप्स हैं उसमें ऐड भी हो जाएंगे, तो और आपको काम होते रहेंगे. तो बहुत अच्छा है. और अगर किसी का और प्रश्न हो तो प्लीज आस्क.
Well said, Manish. Very well said.
थैंक यू मैम. थैंक यू. मुझे लगता है मैम लोगों ने बहुत अच्छे से
Yeah.
आपकी बातों को सुना है, समझा है।
I think we can
और
let
मेरे
yeah.
लिए तो आज का लेक्चर मुझे 2-3 साल पुराने वाले लेक्चर से याद दिला दिया जो आपके क्लासेस में मैं किया हूँ। एंड थैंक यू, आपने मुझे बहुत अप्रिशिएट किया उस समय, और उन्हीं सब के कारण आज मैं ये कर भी पा रहा हूँ। और सबसे अच्छी बात ये रही कि आज मुझे मुझे बहुत बड़ा खजाना मिला है। अब बहुत सारे लोगों को मिला है, बहुत कुछ इनपुट्स मिले हैं, रेफरेंसेस मिले हैं।
You're very kind. I enjoyed speaking. I'm so grateful to you for giving me time, because, my biggest problem is that, there are all these things. In fact, I just want to mention here, Manish, and my audience here, that I was actually going to do one more small section, which I didn't do, but I will just mention it. And I'm very much inspired by Claude Levi-Strauss, who was a structuralist anthropologist who was French, and he worked in Brazil and all. And he has this beautiful binary way of looking at the world. So I was going to use that binary model of Claude Levi-Strauss to show tacit versus explicit, और उसके नीचे एक के बाद कैसा आता है ना, वो मैं दिखाने वाली थी, पर मैंने बोली अभी नहीं, बहुत टाइम लग रहा है, तो इतना टाइम नहीं ले सकते, so I like some other time. So I'm very happy that I was quite relaxed because of your composure. Otherwise, you feel worried, and then you
मुझे सबसे ज्यादा अच्छा लगा कि जो हमारी ऑडियंस है, जो गेस्ट हैं, जो अपने आप में एक इसके मेंटर भी हैं, वो सब बहुत अच्छे हैं और उन्होंने बड़े पेशेंसली इन सारी चीजों को सुना। और क्योंकि आजकल ऑनलाइन के जमाने में ये पेशेंस रखना बड़ा पेशेंस का काम हो गया है। तो मुझे लगता है कि आप सबका भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और मैम रियली आपका बहुत बहुत, मुझे हमेशा सपोर्ट मिलता रहा है आपका। मैंने एक कॉल को करीब 2-3 साल बाद आपसे कांटेक्ट किया और आपने मुझे डांटा कि मुझे डॉक्टर मनीष अरोड़ा मत बोलो, तुम मेरे लिए मनीष ही ठीक हो। मैंने कहा मैम पहचान ली, बहुत अच्छी बात है। मैम बहुत बहुत बढ़िया रहा। मैं आपको फिर से जरूर डिस्टर्ब करूंगा, और अब रवि सर को भी डिस्टर्ब करूंगा, थोड़ा सा सर से भी बहुत कुछ आउटपुट लेना है मुझे। सर हमारे वन ऑफ द मेंटर हैं ही आप दोनों लोग। तो हम जल्दी फिर मिलेंगे मैम। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आप सभी का भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और जिस किसी को जब भी जो ऑडियंस अगर किसी तरीके की कोई क्वेरीज हो, कुछ भी हो, तो हमसे पूछ सकते हैं, और जिस किसी भी एक्सपर्ट से जरूरत होगी मैं जरूर बात कराऊंगा। और मैम ने जिन 3-4 एमिनेंट स्कॉलर्स का आज नाम प्रेजेंट किया है, मैं मैम से ही भी कुछ मैसेज लेके मैं जल्दी हम लोग उनका सेशन करेंगे। अभी सोशल डिजाइन से रिलेटेड चीजें 5-6 महीने तक चलती रहेंगी। एक शॉर्ट टर्म कोर्स भी आ रहा है मैम जल्दी, वो आपको बताऊंगा, 3 महीने का। और एक हमारा 24 तारीख को एक लेक्चर है आईटी कानपुर में, कुमुदी पाटिल है, वो ह्यूमैनिटीज में है, वो भी एक अच्छा कर रही है, शाम को 7 बजे से। तो वो आप सब लोग रहिएगा। थैंक यू मैम, थैंक्स अ लॉट। एंड प्लीज मैम, प्लीज आप सभी लोग सुरक्षित रहिए। आप बहुत इस समय खतरनाक जगह पे हैं बॉम्बे में मैम, प्लीज टेक केयर। थैंक यू मैम, थैंक यू।